This week I've been dealing with street children and the issues they face whilst out on the street in the local town. And it's a difficult subject to talk about. These boys and girls are not only homeless and hungry, not only have no one to love them, nowhere to sleep, no food in their bellies, often covered in various different types of fungal infections and stuff because of lack of hygiene. Get involved with drugs, but unbelievably, there's even worse things happen to these boys and girls. This week I had to sit and listen to a child tell me that he had been raped by men in the town. It became such a frequent and regular occurrence that it was no longer abuse and rape to him, it was something that happens. So instead of them having to find him, he would go to where this was going on, to be abused. Because that was his physical contact in life, I guess. That was his routine. The young children who were hitting the streets, these men will then take younger boys to that boy whilst he does things to that child, and thus the vicious cycle continues. And the only way to stop the cycle is to take the children out. And there's no need for these children to suffer like this. All they need is a place to go. If they had a place to go, somewhere safe where these men can't get to them, they wouldn't have this problem.
There is a movie at this time that is creating a little bit of controversy. This movie's name is The Sound of Freedom. And if you have not heard of this movie, I'll touch on what it's about. But the whole controversy of how the mainstream media, in part, is responding to this movie is something that I have a personal connection and a personal insight into. The mainstream media are claiming that this movie, which follows real-life events of a man called Tim Ballard, and Tim Ballard was a Secret Service agent working in human trafficking, and the movie follows how he set up independently, without the support of the US government, to start rescuing children who were being sex trafficked. Now, the mainstream media, many outlets, big outlets, have said that the movie is steeped in QAnon conspiracy, ultimately in a way that is not favourable. They are trying to discredit this movie and what it's doing.
But these films are created out of moral panics, they're created out of bogus statistics, they're created out of fear, and with something like Sound of Freedom, it specifically is looking at QAnon concepts of these child trafficking rings that are run by the high-level elites, and only people like Tim Ballard and only people like Jim Caviezel, and by extension, only people like the ticket buyer can help bring these trafficking rings down. So there's a very participatory element. You're not just going to see a movie, you're just killing 2 hours on a hot day. You are helping bring down these pedophile rings and save children. Now, it's not true, but it's a very comforting and it's a very warm feeling to have.
But this movie is dropping a very bright light in a very dark room. And when they are saying it is QAnon conspiracy, they are leaning more towards these topics of people sacrificing children or drinking the blood of children, very heavy topics which for many you could easily understand how people could not believe they are real and say it is conspiracy. But as a man who at present we are protecting children in our care who were chased to be sacrificed, children that were given to us to join our family by police because people had tried to kidnap them to sacrifice them. We on this channel have shared a lot of that. We've shown you where we have found children in chains who were sex slaves, where children have joined our family who were blind and deaf and yet had a baby because they had been used in this way, sadly. Children who have limbs missing are in our family, and not because of sickness but because of human depraved behaviour, the principalities of darkness, shall we say, working inside humanity. We have shared a lot of this, and you have seen me physically bringing children out of situations where they were already sliced open, sometimes dozens of times, which is a witch doctor practice to let the blood out for satanic ritual or to prepare them for sacrifice. And so I feel I must speak into this, because for those of you who may be swayed by the mainstream media, I can stand here with documented evidence on this channel that this is not nonsense. This is not conspiracy. This is sadly happening, and it's happening in our world. And so it's not the mainstream media, it's the unwitting souls within there that are being afflicted, I would say, by the spiritual wickedness in high places. For it does not want you to take that energy source, and this is a profoundly dark and perverse problem, and it is a problem in our human story, and it's hard to talk about, but it is reality. And so I have never shared everything about this on this channel. I've saved your ears and your eyes and your hearts from it, but I am going to speak into this because this is a reality that we have lived. But to come back now to this movie and what this movie is about, that the mainstream media is saying this, it's about child sex trafficking in Tim Ballard. And I haven't seen the movie as I'm in Germany, but I know the story and I've seen bits and pieces, and I know the true story of Tim. The movie follows his decision to give up on working with the US government and instead work independently to actually rescue these children where he had more freedom to do so. The beginning of this movie, which I have seen, I will share this because I think this sets you up to see what the movie is like. At the beginning, a father in Colombia is asked to take his children to a talent scout, and this talent scout is a very beautiful woman, and this is a true story. She was a former Miss, I want to say Colombia, but she's a former beauty pageant queen from Colombia, and the father drops off the children and tries to stay, and they say, no parents, you come back later and pick them up. And when all the parents return later, there's nobody there. And this is really happening. Parents have trusted another human being who have innocence and beauty in their heart, and when they go back for their children are gone, never to be found again. Now, as a parent, you can imagine immediately that pain. But as a regular human being, if you can tap into empathizing, imagining that pain, now as you walk down the street and you see the drug addict or the homeless drunk, don't judge. The movie sets you up well to see that immediately. Love really is the answer. Don't judge, you don't know what someone is facing, and the fact that human beings today that are breathing the same air as you have lost their children and don't know where they are gives an understanding how so many become so broken and lost and falling into trying to medicate this pain away with drugs. So put love first is the first thing I want to say, and even as you listen to what I have to say here, don't let it bring you into doom and gloom, because that's not why we are here. We are here to extinguish this darkness. Now, Jim Caviezel, who played Jesus in The Passion of the Christ, plays Tim in the movie, and it follows an exact sting. And so for the mainstream media to say it's QAnon conspiracy is truly insanity, for it follows a real-life story that is documented with body cam footage, etc. And you have to ask, what's the agenda behind that? And as I say, for me it's very clear to go to the root. It's spiritual wickedness in high places. For I know that the enemy is using this dark satanic witchcraft in this world. Now, from a personal standpoint, I had no interest in dealing with these situations. When I first met Spirit and found that love just healing me and filling me, I was overflowing, and it had to be shared. And God led me blindly to East Africa. As you know, I didn't know why I was going there. I just followed because I was certain it was God. I told my family, God told me to go there. And as a non-religious or prayerful family, everyone thought I was mad. But my whole goal in my heart was to share love. This is what I wanted to do, to share the love that I felt was needed. And this is what we did, and we worked in 3 areas. And this is important. We worked in child labour and slavery. We worked in special needs children, and we worked in street-involved children. Now, our family these days is huge. There's over 200 children, a mixture. Predominantly they are special needs or disabled children. And we have a lot of street-involved boys who were in gangs living on the streets. And we have helped, up to now, I don't know the exact number, but it's over 1,000 children since we started, out of extreme poverty, and a lot of them were in child labour. A lot of them were in that child labour situation. And in those 3 areas where we worked, every time we came across witch doctors, child sacrifice or sexual abuse, in every single one. And so I had no interest in this. I wanted to only help the children. But you quickly see that when you shine light, the shadow pushes back. And so the first thing that happened was that, I remember the day very well, the former social worker called Thomas came to us and said, the police have arrived with a little girl who I knew. And I know this girl because we were visiting the family and giving them bus fare so they could take the child for physiotherapy, as she has cerebral palsy. Now this is important because now you're about to understand a little about the religion behind child sacrifice and what they believe. So these men had came to kidnap this beautiful little girl. She was only 5 years old, to kill her, to sacrifice her. And as they were trying to break the door down, they shouted through the window to the mother, just pass us the girl and you won't get hurt. And she screamed and screamed, and the neighbours rescued her. And when the police came, she said, there's a white guy and he's around somewhere, I don't know where because he's only ever visited us, but he was giving us bus fare, maybe he can help. And this began the story of protecting these children to some degree, for the police came with this little girl and said, can you protect her? We can't. Someone tried to kidnap her, we presume with intent to sacrifice. And as I went into this situation, I found out that they target special needs children specifically because they believe they are free of sin. And so this was the first event where we realized that we were in this situation, as we already had some special needs children living with us. The work of Tim Ballard, I have seen, they had an agent in Uganda. I saw a video. Now, when organizations take over helping children, the stories can get lost. And I say this because from the profiles of the cases that we've had, I felt that the video had made an error. Now, I may be wrong, but they had a little girl who looked to be cerebral palsy. And they said what had happened is witch doctors had kidnapped her, tied her up by her hands and feet, and had been cutting her open to take her blood for ceremony. In my experience, now they said she was disabled because of this, and maybe, I could be wrong, but in my experience I would investigate that more, because the truth matters when you're dealing with these people. My experience tells me they probably took a child that was disabled already, for that purpose, because they believe she's free of sin, and therefore her suffering, her blood, it has magic power. This is what they believe. It's insane, I know, but it's what they believe. And so I know they are aware of this situation with child sacrifice in East Africa, because I saw that video, but I questioned whether they had the full details correct. Now this starts our journey. Now what you might not see when you see our happy smiling children is that at that time there was a lot of conflict. I was the only white guy, European, in tens of thousands of Tanzanians, and a lot of people got together and wanted to chase me off the land. They didn't want this to take place, the village, the dog rescue. These people wanted self-gain. And so I was friends at that point with some Maasai warriors, and I asked them to come and sleep on the land as someone told me they might poison the dogs. And they did, and people did come and they chased them, and the Maasai are the most feared tribe in Africa. They're tough. They used to have to kill a lion without a bow and arrow or anything, no guns, just to prove their manhood. So they're tough. And not having fear is an important part of this tribe. So I, when this little girl moved in, asked them to become security, and to this day there is a platoon of Maasai warriors who work 24/7 guarding our children's village and our children, specifically our special needs children and our albino children. Now, if they ever feel overwhelmed, which I find unlikely, but if they ever did, we also have a panic button which calls an armed response unit. One time the button malfunctioned and they were there within a minute or two, and they were wearing riot gear, carrying shotguns, and it was the real deal, shall we say. That's the security for our children's village, so you understand this. This is for a beautiful village which is full of laughter and giggles and therapy and education. This is what is behind the security. Now, when it comes to child sacrifice, most people know, because there was a lot of publicity about the albino man, woman and child issue, where children were, and forgive me for being graphic, but if the mainstream media is going to say this doesn't exist and that it's conspiracy, children are taken, and people do drink their blood in East Africa in these witch doctor religions. But you are not understanding that there are children found that were just playing with their friends, and then they find them on the street with the head missing, or with the arms are missing, or legs missing. These albino children are hunted in the same way special needs children are targeted. And the belief is that they have magic powers, their body parts have magic powers. And so we have children that are albino in our family. And I've listened to a little boy, 9 years old, who we love very much, talking about this final week before he came to us to live, to be safe, where men with hunting knives followed him down the street, and it was a market stall worker who saw them and realized what was happening and screamed for help, and this little boy was brought into the protection of a crowd because they realized these men were planning to kill him, or to whatever they were wanting to do, kidnap him or steal a body part. And this is the last week in normal Tanzanian society before he came to join our family, for that reason, because men were trying to kill him or to mutilate him for his body parts. That's a 9-year-old boy walking to school in broad daylight. They were following him with knives. This is not conspiracy. This is reality. And if it exists there, it has to exist in other humans around the world. It has to. It's the innate. We share psychology. Humanity is one. And so we also help families with albinism, and we know where there are families now hidden in the mountains that we have been working with and protecting in safe zones, safe areas where people are together with them. So this problem has been a part of our lives. You have seen me find children on this channel that had been sliced open multiple times to let the blood out for ceremony or to prepare them for whatever was ahead. And those children again come to live with us where they are safe. And so this whole concept that it's nothing but conspiracy is so hard for me as a man to sit and listen to. This depraved, satanic rebuttal of a reality. However dark it is, you never ever can gain ground on darkness unless you look at it. And unless we stand in the truth, we can't hide from it because it feels icky. It's important. If you have the emotional stamina as a human being to address these issues without making it about you and getting all dramatic and anxious, and if you have the stamina to take care of these problems, you have to look at them. And it's not nice. You know, it's not pleasant. And so beyond there, the notion of sex trafficking and stuff, as I say, we've found children in chains, not necessarily in high-ranking organised crime like you're finding in South America, but low-level organised crime, the same issue, the same situation, where children are used as a sex slave for the fallen, perverse brothers and sisters among us. Now, when you hear all of this, I mentioned at the beginning that in 3 sectors of our work, we have a home for street-involved boys, which is growing every week, and we had a new child arrive just 2 days ago, and there's 50+ boys. We've got a music school, but they've all been involved in drugs and crime, and nearly all of these boys have been raped. Nearly all have been raped by gangs of heroin users on the street. And so we have to do a lot of work to heal these children, to take that behavior out of them, as many of them were taught to rape as well. So you meet this profound darkness in that situation. And so we found sex trafficking in the homeless boys. We found drug gangs trafficking boys, and we brought them to live with us where they'd be safe. The special needs children, we found out that indeed they are being kidnapped. We have had children near us disappear that were living a few kilometers away from outside their home, and nobody ever found them again. And we know that this is from witch doctor gangs, but they've also came to us, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But they came to our property one night, and in God's wisdom, God saved us by the most unlikely set of angels you would ever meet, and I'll get onto that in a moment. But now these child labourers, the very first child I ever helped in Tanzania, was being sold into slavery. He was being sold by a man who was dominating his mother. That boy, I was talking to him this week, and he's an awesome young man now. He's not a boy. He's a mountaineer. He guides people up Kilimanjaro, and he's waiting for me to come to Tanzania. He calls me dad to this day. It's the first child we ever helped. I ever helped, before there was an organisation actually helping anybody. He was the first child. Now, as that progressed, and I saw all of these child labourers, the child labour that we were focused on was children breaking rocks in quarries into gravel for construction. Now, we started an education fund where we were helping these children one at a time get out of that situation and into school. And it wasn't taking much. It's like $20 a month, $25 a month by now can get a child out of that situation and into full-time education. This led me to take an interest in an area where we weren't situated, and that is the gemstone mines. Well, I took, and I've never said this publicly, many years ago, before charity was registered, I went with 2 guys, both called Emmanuel actually, and we drove to the gemstone area in the middle of nowhere. They say it's a bit lawless there. And I tried to pay a guard to let me in to the gemstone mines so I could reach these children and ask them if they want to go to school instead. And I knew if I could get in and see them and get some images I would be able to help them. Well, it went badly. I was very gung-ho, and I just simply went to the gate and tried to bribe a guard to let us in to take pictures. And so we ended up surrounded after about 10 minutes, and we had to escape in this four-wheel drive in the middle of nowhere. So a lesson learned from me was to not do that again, but we found out that children were going missing around this industry. And a lot of the locals were saying that even the special needs children were being taken for sacrifice for industries like this and around the country. And we heard that there were children being sacrificed who were able-bodied as a way to appease the spirits, to show them where they should dig. And so able-bodied children are not free of this. And there are things that haven't been shared here. Things that should be heard but are hard to hear. Like going to a police station and they mistake you for being there for a different reason, and then being shown bodies of children in the back of a pickup truck that have had their eyes removed and their tongues removed and things like that. These things are happening out there. Police are having to find children with organs removed, eyes removed, and bring them back, and then start a long, slow process of trying to identify them, trying to find where they are from, or who they belong to, whilst looking nothing like they once did. This is a religion that's functional and happening. These witch doctors are everywhere in Tanzania, and the government is fighting hard. All praise to the Tanzanian authorities. They are constantly setting up stings on witch doctors, constantly fighting against witch doctors. They've built protectorates to protect their albino community. It's a never-ending battle, but it's real. You know, that's the important part of this video. It's real. It's happening. And so for the media to say that a movie that stands a chance for humanity to drop a huge light on one of its darkest, most perverse, shadowy behaviours, to say it's conspiracy to discredit it is just despicable. It's despicable. Why would you do that? Why would you align yourself with something that is going to attempt to go against the salvation, the rescue of children that live in absolute torment, that live in terrible situations? And so all love to the team at Angel Studios, and Tim Ballard, of course, for actually physically doing the work, Jim Caviezel for taking the role and doing it, and for what they are bringing to the world as in the light of this situation, and how they are shining a light directly into the depths of the foundations of Satan's power. Because these sacrifices, these murderous behaviors, this horrificness that you can't begin to think and digest, is a spiritual war. And when you shine a light on it, you really put some damage on the shadows. You put some damage on the kingdom of the enemy. When you take away that, if too many people become aware and awake to it, you do great damage. Now for us on our journey, we continue to help these children, and our goal is not purely that. We are there because these special needs children and street children, they're living terrible lives. They're vulnerable to rape and abuse, yes, but they deserve a normal life, education, food, a future. They deserve all of that, and this is our focus. This is what we are there to do. But part of us doing this and building the new village, for example, that many of you are helping us to build as I speak, we are having constructors there and getting everything going. That village, as well as providing food and education and a safe, loving family, part of it is it provides security against the witch doctors, against children being vulnerable to this, against that horrific truth that people are sacrificing disabled children and able-bodied children and albino children, all of which we are working with and helping. And so I will finish with a story for you all, because our God is an awesome God and has wisdom beyond our understanding. I never knew this problem as I started adopting these kids. Before I'd even met my wife, I was acting as father to a small family unit of children, all of which were very, very sick, some of which were dying, and it was a very strange time, shall we say, because at the same time I was rescuing dogs, because I love dogs as well. And so our land filled up. We had the children's home initially, which has now turned into the village, and we had the dog rescue. One night, many years in, we had around about 50 or 60 rescue dogs at the time, maybe a few more actually. And if I'm not wrong, I may be wrong, I think my wife was pregnant. Fritzi is the name of my wife. And Fritzi, this night, was at the children's home, and one of the girls came outside and she saw a man on the other side of our fence hiding in the bushes. And so she called me, and I went and I called the man and spoke with him in Swahili, and he pretended to be drunk. It was an act. He acted drunk. Now, our children's village is in the foothills of Mount Kilimanjaro, 2 kilometers from the nearest settlement where you could be drinking. And the road past our children's village leads to nothing but farmland. So this guy said he lived up the road, and I knew this was not true because I knew everybody. I knew all the farmers up the road. But immediately my heart started to pound, because our Maasai guards had for weeks been arranging that they would take time off because they had a ceremony at the community, at the village. And so we had had local men on the team as well who were not Maasai. And some of those local men had called in sick. And so that night there was me and one guard. Now those local men no longer had jobs with us, of course. But as it happened, as it would be, we have a random intruder skulking around our property, and we have all of our guards off except one. So the guard went out and confronted this guy and sent him on his way into the dark, but into nowhere, because he was going uphill where there's nothing. So I figured he's going to come back. Well, then I had at that time around 9 or 10 security dogs, bigger dogs. I had a German Shepherd and things like this, and they were out, and they started behaving unusual. They were running to one fence and barking, and then they'd run to another and another. And on our acre of land, they kept running around and barking in all different directions. And I realized that there's probably therefore people surrounding us. Why are they behaving that way? And so this continued until the guard found another man down at the other end of the property. We'd snuck around without torches switched on and caught him in a torch. Now, this area is pitch black. There's no electricity there. There was only us running on solar power at the time. And at night, the DC lights are not very bright. So it's pitch black around you. There's nothing there but bush and scrub, and you've got a road on one side. So the guard found him, and he pretended to be drunk as well. And then the guard and I became quite worried, because we understood he was not drunk. There was not randomly 2 drunk people wandering in the middle of nowhere near our property. And so at that time I made a decision to let every dog out. And I never do that because they'd fight. You let 50 dogs out, you'd end up with some politics sometimes. But I let them all free. And this is God's wisdom. This is the unlikely angels that God knew what he was doing. I'm certain of this to this day. The dogs split up into packs, and they all went to a fence each. The packs were moving around and mingling, but predominantly you'd end up with some dogs at one fence barking at the same time as other dogs were at one fence barking. And my main security dogs, who I trusted the most, had formed a pack of around about 15 dogs, with the security dogs as well included. And they were just barking into the bush in front of us, and we had nothing but a a chain fence with no wire on top or barbed wire. You could hop over this fence very easily. And the dogs were going crazy, and I'm stood with a man who I could see was visually terrified as I was, and we've both got a machete. And we have this situation now, and the little boy who I first ever adopted, Dominic, realized something was going on, because I'd locked Fritzy, my wife, and the children in the children's home. And then the little boy, Dominic, he'd been in a separate room, and he came running out in his underpants to hit the panic button. He wanted the armed response unit because he was watching through the window and he could see me and the security with a machete and the dogs barking, and he thought people were going to jump over the fence. The rats had ate the wire on that particular button. Unbelievably, the rats had ate the wire, so we'd hit the button and nobody came. Had we hit a different button, they would have came. And so, thankfully, after a very long night of this behaviour by the dogs, which was totally out of the ordinary, and us constantly trying to sneak around with torches to catch people and seeing the odd shadow, it all started to calm down, and we believe to this day, because it was terrifying. I was frightened that night. We believe to this day that had the dogs not been there, that they would have jumped that fence, and the only goal to jump that fence would be to snatch children from us. There's nothing else for them to do other than that at that location. And if you wonder how could that be worth doing, the UN say that an albino child is worth $20,000 on the higher black market in East Africa. And that higher black market is rare, so you're looking at people who are making a lot of money. There was a lot of discussion around it surrounding politics, or a lot of discussion surrounding the gemstone mines, and everyone's a little bit uncertain who the perpetrators are that are paying for this service so they can sacrifice children. But there's also lower levels, you see. There's people in poverty who are doing it, which is why it's hard to manage. It's hard to know where it's coming from. And so the very notion that it's conspiracy comes from nothing but either spiritual wickedness in and of itself, or arrogance and ignorance from people who simply want to make themselves look like they know something when they know nothing. And that's an unfortunate trait of many humans. As we know, we're very arrogant. We want to have all the answers, even when we don't have them. I guess I've said everything. But what I will say, and I will end the video with this important note. To all of those guys doing this, to Tim Ballard, congratulations on your work. If you ever want to set anything up in Tanzania, I can help you with that. I know the religion, I know locations, I have a team, I have safe places for the children, we have people in protection now. We can do something. If you're in Uganda, then we can connect you with the government and help, if you think you can, bring skills to help the Tanzanian government to bring more of these witch doctors to justice and eradicate this for good. So my love to them, congratulations. But for you who are watching, you listen to this depravity, this perversion, and you can't hardly believe it. It makes you uncomfortable, and I'm sorry. But let me also lay something at your feet. Many years ago, those people who are sacrificing children, who are trafficking children, who have them in chains, you know, many years ago, they did something. They let a little bit of sin into their life. And they let it in without any challenge, meaning without any repentance. So they let a little bit of lust in, a little bit of corruption, a little bit of perversion. And because they let that little bit in, it took hold of them, possessed them, and turned them into monsters. Now I say to you, you don't know if you are one of the ones in humanity who is susceptible to descending into that perversion. You don't know what Satan can do to you. If you are letting a little bit in and Satan knows you have a weakness spiritually, maybe he will hit you with a traumatic, horrendous event, knowing that you'll fall deeper into your perversion. What I'm trying to point at is that don't give him ground. Don't give lust, corruption, don't give it ground. If you are giving it ground, fight until it's gone. Fast, pray, meditate, drive that out. And don't pray to God about your situation. You get tuned in with God by correcting your life, and you start speaking to these situations about the power of God. That's your power. It's not to be on your knees saying, God, please sort this out. It's to that situation that is oppressing you and you need delivering from, to turn to that situation with the power and the authority of God and speak to it until it's gone. You speak with the authority until it's gone. To do that, we have to make sure we don't let it in. Lust, etc., corruption, it's a demonic virus. If you give it an inch, it'll take a mile. If you give it a little home in you, it'll still sit there dormant, waiting to corrupt you. And just remember, if you don't understand the significance and the importance of this, that those people trafficking children, those people sacrificing them, they did the same. They gave it a little home, and it escalated. And they used their drugs, and so they felt really comfortable with what they were doing. Just as the same way someone can be addicted to pornography, smoking marijuana, and feel like everything's nice and comfortable and peaceful here. Or they can smoke marijuana and break the law, like I used to, and you feel quite stable and peaceful. Oh yeah, it's okay. But what you're doing is you're loving perversion. You are loving perversion, meaning you are worshipping Satan with your very heart when you do that. It's the worst of the worst. And so I will use this video to deliver that personal message. They all started with just a little bit of sin. And so make sure you have your repentance life in order. Make sure you have your purification life in order, your fasting, your prayer. And make sure you understand that for the collective you fight, not only for your own self-benefit. Because you never know if Satan has a plan for you, if he can get you to fall far enough. Because in the same way God has a plan for your life, so does Satan. But here's the interesting thing. The very interesting thing is this. Satan's only power is worldly desire. So if you live in a world where you think freedom is attaining your worldly desires, or you are listening to people who say that, they are agents of the enemy if they know it or not. Satan's only power over you is temptation and worldly desire. If you are able to attain worldly desire, but keep it sheathed, you become a warrior for God. For Satan has just been disabled, for he's tempting you with all he has, worldly desire. I'll offer you the world. But if you've overcome worldly desire, if you don't need worldly desire, so as you can build yourself a comfortable prison cell in life, if you can be comfortable and loving and powerful without fulfilling worldly desire, by overcoming worldly desire, you just set yourself apart from the crowd. You just made yourself into something God can use in a very mighty way. This is important. It's how we beat this darkness, truly.